Today we're counting down the 5 Kate Bush albums that you need to own on vinyl. So Kate Bush, one of the most incredible and influential musicians of all time, one of my all-time favorites, and really a very beloved and very celebrated artist. However, I still feel there's a huge portion of the vinyl community that kind of ignores her music, whether it's because she gets lumped in as a pop artist and maybe you're more of a rocker, or maybe you've heard some of the singles, which I think are awesome, but they didn't connect with you for one reason or another. I still think that if you're into music from the 70s or 80s, particularly stuff on the artsier side of things, think David Bowie, Roxy Music, King Crimson, Pink Floyd, Ecstasy, The Talking Heads, Fleetwood Mac. I mean, I think there's something that the further you dig into her discography, you'll learn to love and really enjoy. So today I wanted to give some options so that if you're falling in that category, you can get started, maybe find something that'll pique your interest a little bit. As well, if you're brand new to Kate Bush, I'll give you some places to start and give you just a bit of an overview of her music. So let's go. My first choice for a Kate Bush album that you must own on vinyl, I'm gonna go with The Kickin' Side, her debut album. So as far as a debut album goes, particularly for how young she is, this thing is absolutely killer. There's so much variety. There's these very dark, broody tracks. There's these beautiful piano ballads. There's the huge hit Wuthering Heights with her soaring vocals. There's also some moments that are a little more progressive rock. You know, the saxophone song reminds me of like King Crimson meets Fleetwood Mac. It's amazing. Rockers like James and the Cold Gun. I mean, some people say this album's a little rough around the edges, and I think that it's obviously her starting point and she grew a lot as an artist, but there's so much good music here that it's a must own for me. Something that's really cool about this from a vinyl collectability standpoint is that there's different covers for many different countries. I wonder what it was like in the meeting at EMI Records when they decided which country we get each album cover. There was like, oh, the United States, they like jeans, let's put her in jeans on the cover, and in Canada, let's have her doing some weird thing with her head. That'll resonate with the Canadians, which apparently it did, because this album went platinum in Canada. I mean, it had huge singles, but this is one that I see more often than any of her other albums at stores, so it's quite available. It's still quite cheap, even though her popularity has continued to skyrocket, particularly with younger people. I've seen so many young people grabbing this while I've been out record shopping in the last couple years, which has been really cool. Yeah, incredible album. I would pick this up if you see it. My next recommendation is Never Forever, her third studio album from 1980. So by this point, Kate had had a few years under her belt in the industry, was learning a lot about recording, becoming more confident in her songwriting abilities. She also wasn't touring either, so there wasn't a lot of pressure to write to be able to perform it. So she was kind of putting everything in the composition of this album, and it shows. This thing is killer. This is what I would call her rock album. If you're a fan of like David Bowie's Berlin trilogy, I think that this is right up your alley. Just these polished, epic, huge soundscape rock songs that are just unbelievable, and every time I listen to this, I just like it more and more. There's times where she uses her voice as instruments. She starts to experiment with all these different uses for doing her own background vocals, making her voice sound like a synthesizer. The hit on here was Babooshka, one of her most beloved tracks. So I mean, there is a big hit on here, but there's a ton of amazing deep cuts as well. Personal favorite, Egypt. That thing is so epic, so dark. Oh, I love it so much. We're also starting to see kind of her weirdness and all these different kind of sounds that she's playing with. Some awesome songs on here. Highly recommended for 70s art rock fans. My next recommendation is Hounds of Love, an album I probably don't need to say a lot about, so I'll try to keep this short and sweet, but arguably the best side A in vinyl history. Running Up That Hill, Deal With God, Hounds of Love, The Big Sky, Mother Stands for Comfort, Cloud Busting. The second side is no slouch either. Each side is kind of its own story, and the ninth wave is also amazing. There's a lot of new synthesizer sounds, there's some really dark compositions on here, but there's the huge hits. This thing plays like a greatest hits album. It's incredible. There's a reason why it's considered her best album by most, not by all of her fans necessarily, but a spectacular record, one that deserves to be in every vinyl collection. While we're talking about Kate Bush albums, I want to give a bit of a word of caution. So Kate Bush was lumped in as a pop singer, so a lot of her biggest hits were released as 12-inch singles so they could be played at the clubs or whatever. This makes it a little bit confusing, particularly as mentioned with the Kickin' Side, where there's many album covers. You may see an album that you don't recognize, so just be sure that you're not buying a 12-inch single. So if you see an album called Running Up That Hill, Deal With God, It's just one song, it's not the full album. Unless you want that or you're gonna collect it. I mean, it's cool. Go pick it up anyways. I'm gonna put that out there as a word of caution. I have nearly bought 12-inch singles thinking they're full albums dozens of times. It's gonna happen one of these days, so just be careful. Make sure you look at the back, see what songs are on the album. If there's only 1 or 2 songs, it's one song, it's not an album. My next recommendation is The Dreaming, but I decided to hold off on recommending this one because it's not for the faint of heart. This is by far her weirdest and most outrageous album that she ever put together. This is where she kind of said, screw it, I'm making the album I want to make. I'm doing whatever I want. I'm putting the most bizarre sounds, doing whatever the hell I want on this thing. A lot of people, it doesn't connect right away, but a lot of Kate Bush fans will insist that this is by far her best record, and I'm definitely in the camp of thinking this is an absolute masterpiece and one that you must own. As far as vinyl goes, this thing is like Sgt. Pepper's or Pet Sounds. It's one of those albums that needs to be listened to on vinyl because she put so much care and attention into the different layers, the different instrumentations. From hearing this digitally to listening to this on vinyl, every time I listen to it, there are new things I'm discovering. It is such an unbelievable listen. So experimental, so quirky, so weird. We really get to see her full vocal range as she sings in an English accent. She does like almost like these black metal vocals at times, and there's instruments like didgeridoos, there's samples. It's all over the place, but it's amazing. Such an ambitious record, so incredible. Maybe work your way up to this one, but I think eventually you need to have this in your collection. And as a bonus, if you are not necessarily someone who wants to sit down and listen to her albums, which I think is a shame because she puts so much attention into putting these things together. They're a work of art in themselves. Her individual songs and hits hold up on their own. She has a compilation album that was put out after The Hounds of Love called The Whole Story, where, you know, you get the hits. You get Babooshka, you get Running Up That Hill, you get Wuthering Heights. So I mean, if that's all you want, that's a good place to start. That album's usually fairly easy to find and quite cheap. Probably has gone up a lot, but I mean, I think that's good if you only want one in your collection. I hope I've inspired you to maybe look into the full albums. My last but not least pick is The Sensual World. So this was the follow-up to The Hounds of Love. It stylistically is quite a bit different. However, her songwriting chops, the way she kind of put the album together, didn't really change, and I think it's a fantastic listen. Compared to her other albums, I'd say this is the easiest to digest. You can put this one on in the background and still appreciate it. What I think is cool about this album versus her other ones is that it sounds a lot more modern. This album was put out in 1989. It really seems like it helped to usher in a lot of the sounds of the 90s. And you look at a lot of the great artists of the 90s, Alanis Morissette, Bjork, Fiona Apple, who were super influenced by Kate Bush. It's like I hear tons and tons of that 90s alternative sound on this record. And for that reason, I absolutely love it. And I think that it's such a good listen. It has a couple of her best songs on it, The Sensual World, the beautiful This Woman's Work. A gorgeous record, and one that I think will round out your collection quite nicely. So that is my list. Those are the 5 Kate Bush albums that I think you must own on vinyl. What did you think? Is your list drastically different than mine? Am I an idiot for leaving out Ariel? Are you gonna explore Kate Bush? Where are you gonna start? I'd love to hear what you think below. So yeah, thanks for watching.